Peppa Pig, the Mirror Shadow. The evening was gray and gloomy. Outside, a strong wind howled, making the trees bend and rustle their leaves. There was no rain, but the air felt heavy, as if it could start pouring at any moment. Inside the house, everything was quiet. Peppa sat at the table in the living room, carefully drawing with colored pencils. George was nearby, busy building a tall tower out of blocks. Everything seemed normal. When Mummy Pig called them for dinner, Peppa stood up but accidentally knocked over a pencil. It rolled off the table and disappeared underneath it. She bent down to retrieve it, and then her breath caught in her throat. On the polished wooden floor, she saw a reflection, but it wasn't hers. It didn't move. It just stared back at her from beneath the table, frozen like a photograph. Its little arms were slightly raised, but they didn't match her movements. And its eyes, they were darker than they should have been. Then, slowly, the corners of its mouth curled into a wide, unnatural smile. Peppa gasped and jumped back, her heart pounding. She blinked, and it was gone. Now only her own reflection remained on the floor. Her chest rose and fell quickly. It was just my imagination, she thought, grabbing the pencil with shaking fingers. She rushed out of the room, following George to the kitchen. But the uneasy feeling didn't go away. During dinner, as Peppa reached for her spoon, she caught a glimpse of herself in its shiny surface. She was there, the shadow, that same intense stare. This time, the reflection hesitated for just a second too long before mirroring her. Peppa's fingers grew cold, her heart beat faster. She tried to ignore it, until nighttime. When it was time to go to bed, Peppa entered the bathroom. She turned on the light and stepped up to the sink. In the mirror, her familiar room was reflected, but when she raised her little paw, her reflection didn't do the same. Peppa froze. She took a deep breath. Her fingers trembled slightly as she leaned closer. The shadow in the mirror slowly tilted its head. Its eyes were empty. Its expression wasn't hers at all. Peppa took a step back. The mirror fogged up. Dark smudges appeared on the glass, as if someone was breathing on the other side. Peppa's stomach twisted. Then the glass bent inward, as if something was trying to push through. The light flickered. For a second, everything was swallowed by darkness, and when it returned, the mirror was empty. Peppa spun around. No one was there, but she could feel it. Something was standing right behind her. The surrender of shadows. One evening, the pig family returned home after a long walk in the forest. The house was unusually quiet, as if everything had stopped. There was an odd silence in the air, and the shadows outside the window looked long and distorted. The temperature in the house felt cold despite the warmth outside. Everything around them seemed to have lost its brightness. Peppa entered her room and immediately noticed that her toys on the shelf were turned upside down, and some of them looked strange. Their eyes were dull, and their expressions had become grim. When she touched one of the toys, her fingers passed right through it, as if it were nothing more than mist. Peppa felt her unease growing, and as she turned around, one of the shadows on the wall began to move, stretching as if it were following her. She quickly left her room and headed toward her parents. But when she entered their bedroom, they appeared strangely calm. Mama Pig was sitting motionless in a chair, and Daddy Pig stood by the window, staring into the dark fog outside. Their eyes were empty, and they didn't move, as if they hadn't noticed her presence. Peppa's heart began to race, and she realized that something was wrong in the house. The shadows on the walls started to move, growing longer and darker, as if something in them was coming to life. Peppa hurried downstairs, but the farther she went, the darker the house became. The shadows behind her continued to stretch, swallowing everything around her. She turned to look back and saw one of them, large and ominous, step closer toward her. Peppa tried to run, but her legs wouldn't obey. With every step, she felt her body growing lighter, losing its form, as though she were dissolving into the shadows. The monstrous black spots rushed to engulf the space around her. Peppa tried to scream, but no sound came from her throat, only deep silence absorbed by the darkness. Eventually, she felt herself disappear. Her body became invisible, and the house empty. Everything around her faded into darkness, and Peppa was swallowed by the shadow, becoming part of it. Along with her, her parents and everything that once filled the house with light and life vanished. Left without form, she became a part of that dark space. The next morning, the house remained empty. No trace of the pig family, nothing that could remind anyone of them. The house became abandoned, consumed by the shadow that now ruled it. Anyone passing by noticed only the strange silence emanating from the place. And though years passed, the shadows in that house continued to move, waiting for new souls brave enough to disturb this world. Peppa Pig. Something in the house. The evening at the pig household was unusually quiet. Peppa and George played in the living room while rain tapped softly against the windows. The dim light flickered and a strange tension filled the air. Outside, the wind howled, rattling the trees like eerie whispers in the night. Shadows from the flickering television danced against the walls, elongating into strange, distorted shapes. Then the door creaked open. Peppa turned quickly, her heartbeat quickening. The door had been closed. She was sure of it. Mummy Pig and Daddy Pig entered, but something was wrong. Their movements were too smooth, too silent, as if they glided rather than walked. Their eyes were empty, hollow voids, and their smiles were unnaturally wide, frozen in place like grotesque masks. The room grew cold. A chill seeped into Peppa's bones, numbing her fingertips. The air thickened, pressing against her chest, as if the room itself were alive. George clutched his dinosaur tighter, his little fingers trembling. The silence between them stretched, heavy with unseen dread. Daddy Pig's head twisted at an impossible angle, his neck creaking and popping as he turned 180 degrees to stare at them. Mummy Pig's posture shifted unnaturally, her body bending too far forward, her arms dangling lifelessly at her sides like a broken puppet. Then came the sound. A rhythmic click-clack of hooves echoed through the hallways, slow and deliberate. The footsteps did not belong to anyone they knew. Peppa grabbed George's hand, her grip firm, and without hesitation they bolted upstairs. Their feet pounded against the wooden steps, the house groaning beneath them. Peppa reached their bedroom, yanked George inside, and slammed the door shut, twisting the lock with shaking fingers. Silence. The handle began to turn, softly at first, then with more force. Peppa pressed her back against the door, willing it to hold. Then, a slow, deliberate scratching at the wood. It was faint, methodical, like nails dragging just beneath the surface. A breathy whisper followed, an exhale too close, too deliberate. The shadows in the room began to shift, stretching along the walls in odd, angular shapes, pulsing as though the walls themselves were alive. The air grew colder still, wrapping around them like unseen fingers. Peppa felt her heart hammer against her ribs, her breath shallow and rapid. The house no longer felt like home. It had become something else, something dark, something watching, something waiting. And in the suffocating silence, Peppa knew they were not alone. Peppa Pig, the new friend. One sunny morning, Peppa and George were playing in the garden when a strange piglet approached them. He had pale gray skin, odd eyes with a reddish tint, and a quiet, muffled voice. "Hi, I'm Simon," he said with a smile. "Hi, Simon." "Do you want to play with us?" Peppa asked cheerfully. Simon nodded, but his smile seemed a little off to Peppa. George also looked uneasy, but they decided Simon was just their new friend. At first, they played harmless games. Simon suggested hide and seek, but chose the strangest hiding places, like behind the trees where no one ever hid. When George tried to find him, he suddenly heard a whisper behind him, even though Simon should have been far away. "It's just a game," Simon said, stepping out from the shadows. By evening, things got even stranger. Simon asked to stay for dinner, and Mummy Pig invited him to join. "Are you from the next village?" Mummy Pig asked. "I'm from far away," Simon replied quietly, not taking his eyes off his plate. During dinner, he hardly ate, and instead stared at everyone, especially Peppa. After the family went to bed, Peppa noticed Simon still standing in the garden, staring at the house. The next day, Simon came back. He started inviting Peppa and George to play unsettling games. One game was called Look into the Dark. Simon led them into a dark corner of the shed and said, "Look closely. You'll see something interesting." But instead of something fun, Peppa felt a chilling cold, and Simon's shadow in the darkness seemed to move on its own. One evening, Peppa heard whispering outside her bedroom door. She cautiously peeked out and saw Simon standing in the hallway. His eyes were now glowing red. "Peppa, come with me. We'll be best friends forever," he whispered. Terrified, Peppa called for her parents, but when they arrived, Simon was gone. The next day, George disappeared. All they found was his toy dinosaur, abandoned in the garden. Simon appeared again and said, "Don't worry, he's with me. He's happy." Peppa realized Simon wasn't a friend, but something far more sinister. She tried to make him leave, but he just smiled and said, "You're next." Transparent Peppa. One morning, Peppa woke up feeling a strange lightness in her body. At first, she thought it was just fatigue, but when she looked in the mirror, she noticed that her reflection appeared a bit dull. It seemed like her outlines were less vivid, and Peppa became slightly scared. The next day, while having breakfast, Peppa noticed that her hand seemed to disappear if she raised it too high. She tried to touch her cup, but her fingers simply passed through it, as if her body was beginning to dissolve into the air. Peppa told her parents about this, and they immediately became worried. Daddy Pig thought it was probably just a temporary problem, but as the day went on, the situation only got worse. Peppa became more and more transparent, and her voice grew fainter and fainter. George tried to hold her hand, but his fingers just slipped right through hers. By the third day, Peppa was almost completely gone. She couldn't walk anymore. Her body was simply invisible, and she could barely speak. Her parents tried to help her, but everything they said seemed to be swallowed by the fog. In desperation, they turned to Granny Pig for help. She explained that this phenomenon was tied to an ancient curse placed on those who forget about the important things in life for too long. She told them that Peppa had not noticed how much time she wasted on trivial things, ignoring her loved ones and important moments. Granny Pig tried to cast a spell to bring Peppa back, but nothing worked. With every word, with every step, Peppa became even more invisible, until at one point she was gone completely. The house grew dark and empty, as though life itself had left it. Her parents and George searched for Peppa, calling her name, but there was no answer. They realized that their daughter was gone forever, and that her invisibility had become part of their reality. The shadows that once filled their lives were now empty. Peppa vanished, and with her all the joy she had brought to the house. The pig family was left alone in a house that no longer felt like a home. And though they tried to forget and move on, every day reminded them of how those we love can disappear if we don't appreciate them in time.